Here we are again at Salt City Hoops. My name is Mark Russell Pereira. Happy to have you along for the ride on another podcast. We are recording on an unusual Friday night. Usually we try to get it out on a Wednesday night or Thursday night or something like that. So you have some end of the work week things to listen to if you're a regular office drone like me, or over the weekend as you're doing your weekend activities, or hopefully not too much weekend work. We're feeling under the weather over the past couple days, so trying to recover the old lungs here a little bit, and maybe we won't be able to punch out a full hour, but it's I don't know, when I get talking about the Jazz, sometimes I just can't stop. And you know me at this point, I'm always going to have things to say. So as we kind of recovered our energy a little bit, caught up with the games that I missed on Tuesday, a lot of exciting games from the past couple days I was able to catch up on, and also the very not exciting games from last week. So now I have thoughts, I have opinions. I've been seeing what you guys have all been saying about the games and the specific players and everything. So I'm trying to recover some energy and talk about some things. I also, before I got sick, I put out a call for people to give me some more trade ideas, right? Because we did a huge trade deadline preview with Dan and Ken Clayton last week that really dives into the machinations of the Jazz at the trade deadline that I think everyone should listen to. But I don't think wild conjecture about trades and fun little things to do. Look, it can get really redundant when you focus on team building and transactional nonsense the whole year. So I really try to limit team building discussion in depth until like we get to the trade deadline, the draft, and the offseason. And so allow us a little bit of a license here to have some wild trade ideas. So what I want to do is give me some players that, whether it's realistic or not, give me some players you're interested in. I'm going to try to make a trade work, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about some of my opinions on the past few games here a little bit, and then seeing I got some names I want to talk about, because not saying they're realistic remotely at all, and certainly I am the least source person in the world for any actual insight, but what I want to be able to bring to you guys is maybe I know some of the assumptions that we have to work with when we're talking about some of these fun players, or some ideas that we can all ruminate on in the comments below on YouTube or on Spotify, or hit us up. You can find me on Blue Sky all the time. The official Salt City Hoops account is on both Twitter and Blue Sky. Very easy to find us. Might get an Instagram account spun up here in a little bit, post some clips of everything. So I hope you're well, and everyone's kids are getting back into the rhythm of the second semester of school. I managed to finally take down my Christmas stocking here in the background, but I felt like I had to keep up the Andrei Kirilenko nutcracker, at least for a little while. And I'm looking at myself in the rearview camera, and my eyes are sunken today. I'm a tired, sick dude, but we're gonna press on and just talk about the Jazz, because we got some things to talk about. So obviously the past two games were, well, let me back up just a little bit. Lauri Markkanen has been out for several games. I don't think he's played since January 8th. I don't think he played in the Charlotte game. Yeah, he played against Dallas on January 8th, was it? Yeah, so he played when the Jazz won a home game against the Dallas Mavericks that made everyone completely lose their minds, is when he had, the 33-7. That's right. That was way back on January 8th. The Jazz have played, how many is this? 7 games since then. And for 6 of those games, he wasn't even on the bench with an illness. Of course, this was surreptitiously timed. The Jazz were starting a 5-game road trip at Cleveland, which we had mentioned on the last podcast. We were able to cover that one. That very exciting win against a very talented Cavaliers team that was healthy. And then at the Bulls, which we had not covered yet, very narrow 2-point loss with Markkanen and Nurkic didn't play. So you were left with kind Kyle Filipowski getting absolutely roasted by Nikola Vucevic the whole game. Vucevic gets the game winner at the end of the day off of, I believe it was an offensive rebound, to get the layup with 4 seconds to go. But it was still only a 2-point loss. It was Bryce Sensabaugh had his career high over 40 points. I think it was just funny to see him get his career high. The Jazz lose a heartbreaker, and he's immediately going for the game ball just to make sure he brings it home. I'm like, okay, man, like, I get it. So sometimes as a fan, you forget, like, these players do care about their personal accolades a little bit, and it was just kind of funny to see. But we haven't seen Markkanen in forever. The surreptitious timing comes after the Cleveland and Chicago games. It's like, okay, if he doesn't play in the Cleveland and Chicago games, maybe he's actually sick, whatever. These illness-based absences for players, even if it's an aggressive flu, it's usually like 3 or 4 games, whatever. But the following 2 games were at Dallas and at Dallas. A back-to-back, if you will. Not on back-to-back nights, but back-to-back at Dallas on a Thursday and a Saturday. And if you're tank watching like the rest of us, Dallas is ahead of the Jazz in the win column, right? So the Jazz have a worse record than Dallas, and Dallas doesn't own their draft pick next year and for several years thereafter, but they do own their draft pick this year, and with Anthony Davis being hurt and Kyrie Irving still not back and the team that's just not doing very well, probably won't make the plan, they're going to hit the tank button sooner or later, so really want to make sure we lose those games against Dallas. And so you would think that after a 3-game absence for Lauri Markkanen, he would be able to play one of these Dallas games. And in fact, he played neither of those games. And I believe Nurkic didn't play in either of them too. I'm going to quickly check this to make sure. Yeah, so they started Filipowski at center in the first game. And then in the second game, it was... because I want to talk about Nurkic playing right. Yeah, so Nurkic didn't play in either of those 2 games. And so Markkanen's on the bench. Obviously, when a guy has an illness, he's not going to sit there on the bench. So I thought it was pretty tongue-in-cheek for Markkanen to not play in those Dallas games. But then he doesn't play against San Antonio a couple days later. And then he doesn't play at home against Minnesota. And then he was finally on the bench last night for return to play conditioning. And I guess he was legitimately extremely sick from what I hear. And yeah, I can imagine that if you're just like on bed rest or just extremely sick over a week and a half, these professional athletes, man, if they're not moving and they're consuming calories or whatever, he probably actually does need some legitimate return to play conditioning. He is officially questionable for Saturday's game against the Heat for return to play conditioning. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just a little bit of conditioning still needed for Lowry. But there was a lot of Dallas fans up in arms about Lowry not playing in those Dallas games. But if he's legitimately sick, well, okay, he's legitimately sick. There's no odd thing about that. But I think Utah definitely hit the tank button real hard on those games because they rested JUSUF Nurkic as well. And Dallas is extremely thin in the front court. Obviously, they're without Anthony Davis for a while, but they're without Derek Lively for the whole year, and they're without Daniel Gafford in a short-term absence. So the Mavericks are currently rolling out Dwight Powell and Moussa Cisse, who's on a 2-way. So the ancient Dwight Powell and the 2-way center is who they have in their front court. Also, I believe PJ Washington, power forward, was out for both of those games, if I recall correctly. So Utah, to hit the tank button, they got to say, look, man, this is going to be big on Kyle Filipowski to play some center. I think Kevin Love played in one of those 2 games. I don't think Sheboy got any minutes, if I recall. It's been a week, man. It's been a long week. I can't remember if Oscar Sheboy played in a game he played in blowout losses against Dallas on the road. But the Mavericks were up in arms. That not the team itself, but I see a lot of fans griping on social media to see JUSUF Nurkic there on the bench saying like the Jazz are not playing a real lineup out there. And the Jazz got blown out in both games against Dallas, lost by 22, lost by 18. I just want to point out, though, that I think despite the blowouts, you still see Keontae George plugging in every night with efficient, normal stat lines, good assists, a little high in the turnover department, especially if he's being relied upon too much. It's the error of the Jazz in a lot of these games has just been the collective is just runs out of talent. Like, giving up 144 points to the Mavericks is the effect of not having enough competent players to just be playing, getting real NBA basketball for 48 minutes of your entire lineup. David Locke talks about this all the time, is that you need 48 minutes out of each of those 5 positions, like who is an NBA quality rotation player, and the more minutes you add to your rotation that just aren't NBA minutes, those are almost always going to be losing minutes. And so you take Keontae George out of the equation, right? If I open up the Thursday, January 15th box score, like, we love Ace Bailey for what he's done. He's not an NBA player yet, right? Taylor Hendricks, who has been DNP coach's decision a lot recently, he can get 16 minutes. He's not an NBA player. Well, Clayton's not there yet. Bryce Sensabaugh can be sometimes. He had 27 points in that one, but he has a lot of nights where he's not. Filipowski's certainly not. Cody Williams isn't. So you have Kyle Anderson, obviously, he plays, I forgot, instead of Oscar Tshiebwe, it's Kyle Anderson as our third, fourth center. I always forget about Kyle Anderson, I think intentionally. I think my brain is waiting for the trade deadline for his money to come off the books, and we don't have to think about Kyle Anderson ever again. My mind gets derailed now by thinking about Kyle Anderson, my wistful thoughts of Kyle Anderson not being on the Jazz anymore. So you have 9 players playing against Dallas in this game, and only Keontae George are you confident that you're going to get every single one of his minutes is NBA quality. And even Keontae is, like, this has been a fabulous breakout year, but he's not impervious to a bad game in his development curve, right? So those were always going to be losses, and I think adding Nurkic might have helped perhaps keep it closer, especially because the Mavericks were so thin in the front court. But I don't think Nurkic would have affected it too much. Now you add Nurkic and you add Markkanen, now you got a stew going, right? Oh, Mikhailuk also didn't play. The notable thing about these is, so Mikhailuk and Nurkic don't play, and Mikhailuk is pretty close to an NBA rotation guy. So that's 90, how many minutes would they typically play? Something around 50 minutes between the two of them, right? 55 maybe. Probably more like 50. They were dressed for the game. We didn't even see Nurkic in a suit. They were dressed and were given like emergency dress minutes only. And there's no player participation policy that applies to Svi Mikhailuk and JUSUF Nurkic. And yes, Mikhailuk and yes, Nurkic have been starting for the Jazz in many games. But if you're Adam Silver, you cannot legitimately call up the Utah Jazz and be like, we're going to fine you because you're not playing Svi Mikhailuk. You rested JUSUF Nurkic. Why did you do that? He's 31 or 32 and 7 feet tall and 300 pounds. He doesn't need a break. Get him out there to play against the Dallas Mavericks. No, man, I think we're going to just play Kyle Filipowski and Kyle Anderson and call it a day. Enough about the tanking Jazz. Let's get into the fun parts about the Jazz recent stretch here. Looking at our recent, just to make sure I don't forget anything. So the loss against San Antonio last night, again, recording this on Friday night, very fun game. Very interesting. I think the 17-point loss belies the fact that it was 99-99 in the fourth quarter, and the Jazz just totally lost the thread. But there were 2 things that come out of that. First of all, 3 things that come out of that. So first of all, got to give massive flowers to JUSUF Nurkic. We didn't mention the win against Minnesota yet. We'll get to that, but that is back-to-back triple doubles for JUSUF Nurkic. Hell yeah, man. So the Jazz go, 16, 17 years without a triple-double. Longest streak in the NBA without having a single player record a triple-double. And there have been some real crappy players record triple-doubles in random moments for a lot of teams. Kind of just goes to show, like, Utah never had, like, anybody who really had that kind of a diverse skill set on the team at all. Ricky Rubio had that. Yeah, that barely recorded that triple-double, but that was more of like, oh, wow, he got 10 rebounds in a game? Like, it was unusual for him at his stage in his career to do that. And Donovan just didn't rack up enough assists. He didn't rack up enough rebounds. He still doesn't. I think Donovan has recorded one triple-double since he's gotten to Cleveland, and maybe not. I might be misremembering that. But JUSUF Nurkic is a guy who rebounds and passes. And what I loved in the San Antonio game, and Will Hardy mentioned something to this effect in the postgame, is that they just decided to build the whole plan out of JUSUF Nurkic passing the ball. So they had great success against Minnesota with this, and Minnesota was they had their healthy complement. They had Rudy Gobert, and Victor Wembanyama is better than Rudy Gobert at this point, but is the same style of defender where you're trying to pull him out as much as possible, and with a guy like Nurkic, you can pass around it, which is really cool. And so after a successful game against Minnesota where he gets a triple-double, gets a bunch of assists, in the second half against San Antonio, they just said, screw it, all JUSUF Nurkic. And he is diamond guys up and cuts and whatever. And a lot of our eyes get drawn to the cut as it's being made to the basket and the pass. But the way Will Hardy's scheming up how the other four players are getting the other guys open, they're almost running like constant little pick plays that you would see a football team run on the 2-yard line with their wide receivers. And it's never the same cut. It's never the same cut. Occasionally they will just do 2 cuts in a row to throw them off, throw off the defense. But in general, they're doing it a lot of different ways. It's not just the same old Keontae cut. It's not the same old Ace Bailey cut. They're fine in that San Antonio game. I noticed a lot of different ways that they were like when Nurkic or Kessler next year, when they're holding the ball at the top, do your hardest to not watch the ball when that happens. It's so much more fun to watch the other 4 players execute a Hardy designed play to get them open for that wide open cut. And it was delightful to watch Wembanyama realize like 4 or 5 times it happened that Nurkic would pass the ball and Wembanyama would realize, oh, I'm going to use my freakishly long arms to try to go block this layup attempt. And even he's just too late because the pass is too accurate and the cut was perfectly timed. I think it was just beautiful. It was really fun. It leads me to more and more and more believe that, and I think I'll talk more about this as the spring comes in and we start talking about the next iteration of Jazz basketball, but I'm ready for the Jazz to hit the gas pedal next year. I think the Jazz are ready for the Jazz to hit the gas pedal next year. But as I look at all these other teams that are like trying to hit the gas pedal next year, Portland, Dallas, Brooklyn doesn't own their draft pick, and they're an interesting team, especially considering like won't they trade Michael Porter Jr. if they're going to try to be good next year, especially in a weaker Eastern Conference. But I think the Jazz, out of all these teams that are ready to like hit the gas pedal, are so much more well constructed and ready to go than other teams. And I want them to immediately have a roster next year that is ready to get a 6, 7, 8 seed. Quick little side note, the reason they're so well positioned is because they haven't traded Lauri Markkanen. Something I've been yelling about for years is that they should not trade Lauri Markkanen unless it's for an absolute bowl you over collection of an offer. And now the Jazz are ready to compete for a legitimate playoff spot and grow from there. Like, not just get a 6 seed for no reason, but like grow from a playoff appearance because they have Lauri Markkanen on the team. But in order to get that, they need to have a full complement of players, not just star players or the starting lineup. And so JUSUF NURKIC has rocketed up my real wish list for backup center next year. He came into the season under contract, and we'll see what happens. He gets the trade from Charlotte, and he understood, like, all right, at my age and my presence, I'm going to back up Walker Kessler, and in certain situations, like Kessler injury or whatever, like, I'll get some chances to spot start or foul trouble. Like, I'm going to be relied upon every night. And they want me. And I think it was probably the first time in a while, perhaps, that he's felt like legitimately wanted despite his flaws, right? Like, Nurkic will always be the most frustrating player around the rim. He does not score at the rim as well as you'd want a 7-footer to do. He misses bunny layups all the time. And it's funny and quirky when the team is trying to lose, as Utah is right now. You don't really care that much. And it's going to be a lot more annoying when the Jazz are trying to win and he's missing bunnies and in the third or fourth quarter or whatever when you're trying to win. But if he's not playing 30 minutes a night, it's just that those impacts are more muted. And the Jazz have a clean salary cap sheet, so I always question, like, what kind of salary would Nurkic get in the open market from a lot of teams. And he's also a guy that seems to really care about how happy he is also. So I wonder if Utah could get him for a little bit more affordable than another team who needs a center and would pay him more and give him more of a role and more of an opportunity, versus Utah, who would say, you're going to be our backup to Kessler again. We're not going to pay you a bunch of money because we got to save some cash to pay Keontae George on his extension, pay Walker Kessler on his extension. He plays the same position. And spend money on more important free agents to get us to the playoffs. All due respect, JUSUF NURKIC, you're a backup center. I wonder if he'd be willing to come back for a backup role and for backup money. I'm not sure if he would, but I would be really, really selling him on it, on the fact that you are wanted here for all of your pros and cons. Back-to-back triple-doubles for him. The win against Minnesota was delightful. Keontae George, another career high for him, 43 points. You keep thinking his career high is way higher than that. It's obviously a very healthy career high, but it's only 43 points. And no Markkanen. Wolves had all their guys. They started their normal starting lineup. They had Randall, McDaniels, Gobert, DiVincenzo, and of course Anthony Edwards, who is dealing with a toe ailment. But Edwards scored 38 and was a +7 against the Jazz. And so, you do the math. Wolves lose by 5. Anthony Edwards plays 39 minutes, and he was a +7. So that means in the 9 minutes that he didn't play, the Wolves were a -12. And the Jazz don't really have anyone. They were doing Cody Williams on him. They were doing Ace Bailey on him towards the end of the game. And it was really when he was out that the Jazz had a bench lineup of Walt Clayton in there, and he did great. And JUSUF NURKIC had his... these triple-doubles are legit, too. They're not just 10, 10, and 10. This is 16 points, 18 rebounds, 10 assists. He had 14 assists against the Spurs. These are legit triple-doubles, guys. Very cool stuff. But the player I think worth highlighting the most, and what most people were talking about, I'm sure you're thinking about it, doing all this talk about JUSUF NURKIC, that I'm not mentioning Ace Bailey. Ace Bailey scored more points against the Spurs, career high of 25 points, than he did against the Wolves, where he had 20 points. But boy, that Wolves game was, I think, more impactful. Not only did the Jazz win against a very quality opponent, so that's where the impact comes in, but you saw a lot more of like what Ace Bailey can do on both sides of the ball. the shining play in both games was he gets a steal underneath the basket against Minnesota, runs the full length of the court after giving it up to Isaiah Collier, I believe, and then he just whips a nasty detonating dunk home against Dante DiVincenzo. Got back, and he made a business decision to not get completely obliterated by Ace. But it was the defense that started. That's when you look at it, you're like, oh man, that's good stuff there. And he was coming around curls and screens and shooting threes. 3 of 8 from 3 against the Wolves, and I think he took fewer attempts from 3 against the Spurs. 3 assists, had a steal, as I mentioned. I'm sorry, 3 turnovers, 1 assist. He's averaged, Ace Bailey's averaged almost 3 assists a game in this month of January. So he's playing a lot more minutes. He's still operating as like a dependent threat out there. My typical criticism of Lauri Markkanen in recent vintage is too much dependent threat movement and not enough independent things. And when Ace Bailey is getting the ball, it's still my typical frustration where he's dribbling into a mid-range shot where he's only shooting in the mid-30s. Like, that's not a great shot for him. He looks great doing it. It looks good. He's just not shooting a high percentage there quite yet. I think he'll get there on those shots. But he'll stop even when he has an advantage. I mentioned this before. And so I think a full season of conditioning and learning NBA bodies and how to play offense, he'll start getting to the rim way more. Because we've seen for the past few games, he has no problem playing above the rim. I've been very impressed with how many and ones he gets on a lot of these dunks. He'll get smashed in the head and still finish a dunk. I think that is a sign of a mentally and physically strong character. So I don't think he's afraid of contact or anything like that. I think it's more learning what he can get away with in that sketchy area between the free throw line and the hoop. How to draw fouls, right? That sort of thing. So just wildly impressive stuff from Ace Bailey. He's dunking all over everything. I think he might... I don't have it pulled up now, and so it'll make for bad radio for me to look it up, but I think he's on pace for 100 dunks this year, which is remarkable. Having that many dunks is really, really, really good for a player. With this extended absence, not sure if Lowry will get back to his 200 threes and 100 dunks level, but Trey Murphy is also perhaps going to do that this year. But Ace Bailey's getting a ton of dunks. He's shooting a little bit better from 3. His form looks great. I think the thing I love about watching Ace, because I tend to be kind of laser focused on him on some of these rewatches, is, and this comes into play on defense a lot, he's never lazy with his eyes. He's constantly trying to really make sure that he's executing, and he makes a lot of mistakes, but it's never out of because he's got his hands on his hips. He'll be late a lot. A lot of his fouls come when he's late to moving to a spot or late getting somewhere, but it's more like reaction time. It's not laziness. He's like staring at a situation, and then it like clocks for him like a full half to a full second late than he should be. They don't get over, and his hands are kind of over a player. They're not, straight up, and he'll get into trouble that way. So I just love watching him figure out the connectivity of defense. He does this on offense too. And I just come away from these games thinking Ace Bailey's understanding of overall NBA offense and where you fit in as a dependent threat and like what the entire offense is trying to do and where you fit in, and basketball IQ and connectivity, being a connector for a lot of these things, is way, way, way higher than I thought it would be going into the year. I think we all thought that those would be the basketball IQ part of this was going to be the stuff he was going to have to learn, and it might take a while. We might have to get pretty frustrated. On the flip side, we would be the reason those types of things would be worth being patient for is because we would just be oohing and eyeing over his isolation basketball capabilities. And he is miles behind on isolation basketball skills and individual offensive creation than we thought he'd be. So he's like the complete opposite offensive player that we thought he'd be. A ball-hogging type of player, but a player who's just trying to figure out his own, that we would tolerate because he does so many cool things with the ball that it's worth dealing with the mental growth delays. Instead, he's already an immediate connector and high basketball IQ guy, which is delightful. Jazz play against Miami Saturday night. We'll see who plays. We'll see if Markkanen plays. Apparently in the Spurs triple-double for Nurkic, he threw up at halftime. Bryce Sensabaugh missed a game for an illness. So we will see who's available to play against Miami on Saturday night. Apparently this is a real illness kind of going through the entire locker room. So we'll see what arises from there. That's I think I have the energy to give you a couple trade ideas. So let's pick out the fun ones. So Lou Dort was brought up by Breeze38 on Blue Sky. He also mentions AJ Mitchell with the comment that OKC can't pay everyone. So a couple things to think about here. So Lou Dort's 27. And he has a team option next year for $18 million. Is he worth $18 million? Probably. He's had a down year across the board. Defensively, still pretty good, but still not his height defensively, and he's having some struggles offensively this year, I've noticed. But next year will only be his age 27 season. And he certainly won't be washed. And as far as OKC and money is concerned, believe it or not, OKC will not have to pay the tax this year. They're about $1 million under the tax this year. It's because the Chet Holmgren and Zion Williams extensions haven't kicked in. So surely next year when those extensions kick in, Oklahoma City will be just over a barrel in tax payments, will they? Not necessarily. Isaiah Hartenstein has a $28.5 million team option. Lou Dort has this $18 million team option. I'm not saying that the Thunder won't pick up both of those if they still have those players, because they're useful players, obviously, to a championship run. They also have Kenrich Williams on a $7 million team option. But even if they just lost Hartenstein and Dort, they wouldn't be in the tax next year. Shea's $40 million, Chet's $40 million, and Jalen Williams is $40 million. You add the very reasonable salaries that they have for the players around the margins, like the Isaiah Joe's at $11 million, Aaron Wiggins at $9 million, Jay Will $7 million. That's a little high for a backup center. Casey Wall is still on his rookie contract. We'll see if he gets a little extension. He's at $7 million next year. So if they just lose Hartenstein and Dort, they're out of the tax. Where it gets problematic for Oklahoma City, as they might have to think about it, is when Shea's extension kicks in 2027. Okay? So Shea's only making $40 million next year, 40.8. And then it bumps all the way up to $62 million. And so on and so forth, right? And so 2027 is when they're definitely going to have the tax. And they have not been tested like this. They seem pretty okay with paying the tax once those three guys, all their extensions kick in. Will they be willing to pay the tax next year? And you and me are sitting here at home with our regular people salaries or whatever, and thinking, why would you ever break up a championship team just for the luxury tax? My only counter to that is Are Lou Dort and Isaiah Hartenstein worth paying the luxury tax for? I think the answer is yes in Hartenstein's case. I think he's way too valuable and certainly some pretty good Chet Holmgren insurance. We'll see how he looks as he finishes out the season. Next year will only be his age 28 season. Good starting player, starting caliber of player. And if they don't want Hartenstein or Dort, like at the $28 and $18 million respectively, what I would do if I had infinite money, as all of these owners do, don't let them convince you otherwise, is use that $28 million, pick up the option on Hartenstein for $28 million and use that salary to trade for something else, right? Combine Dort and Hartenstein to trade those players for someone that you think is better. But it is very possible, not likely, but it's possible. I could totally see them looking at their luxury tax and saying, we're $44 million over the tax, and if we get rid of Hartenstein, Dort, and Kenrich Williams, then we'd be how much under the tax? Like quite a bit. 46, 53. So they'd be about $9 million under the tax. And you could add a decent rotation player for $9 million probably. That's Aaron Wiggins money, right? Like that's a decent rotation player. So something for Oklahoma City to think about. I don't think Clay Bennett is an unlimited money owner like some other owners are. I think he would be conscious about that kind of thing. And this is the type of thing that can unravel. So if that is actually on their mind, that all that preface is to say Lou Dort is what Utah needs. And you'd only get him for one more year because obviously he's not useful to the team this year. And so he'd be playing on the team next year. And who knows what they would build on after that, right? You'd have bird rights on him via the trade to go from there. I don't think he's a player you would want to extend because he's had a bad season. So you're not going into the season thinking of extending him. So he would just become like an $18 million expiring next year. But that's the sort of pre-agency move that I would be in favor of. Is the Jazz desperately need a point of attack dog. Sarah Todd has mentioned this team is devoid of dogs. I think Keontae George has elevated himself into dog status. But certainly not defensively, right? The Jazz have no defensive identity. And your defensive identity cannot just be Walker Kessler. That's not a defensive identity. We saw this shit with Rudy Gobert. And Rudy Gobert was miles better than Walker Kessler is. And if you think he wasn't miles better than Walker Kessler, we're going to have an argument. Right? Kessler is extremely good. He's not a defensive identity. And as good as Rudy Gobert was, and the Jazz would have these top defenses year over year over year, come playoff time, you'll certainly hear me say it's completely overstated how much teams brought Rudy Gobert out of the paint or whatever than that. But it's more that they would do other things to beat the shit out of Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell and such, who are poor defenders, and leaving Rudy to hang out to dry. They have to guard three people at once sometimes. Rudy's not blameless, let's be clear. But Rudy could guard in space. There was no issue with guarding. Rudy Gobert has never had an issue guarding in space. And Walker Kessler has been tested a lot in that department, especially in games that matter. But I think we know that to be a successful championship team, you need perimeter defenders as part of your identity. Lou Dort would be an interesting addition. Now, the assumption here, I mentioned the financials up front, is to say Oklahoma City's not moving Lou Dort for picks, right? They're trying to win a title this year, and they want their guys. So the assumption here is that there has been difficult conversations about the tax bill next year and saying we're not going to pick up that team option for Lou Dort at $18 million, or we're going to pick it up. We're going to pick it up and trade it for a salary dump or something like that. He's worth $18 million, so it's like it. Salary dumping him doesn't seem quite right as what they would want to do. But if Clay Bennett has had tough conversations with his management, with Sam Presti, to say like, look, I'm not paying the tax if we don't have to, then Sam Presti might call around and say like, I think we can win the title without Dort, and I think he's absolutely right there. Dort's not driving the win here, I don't think. He's helpful. He had amazing moments in the playoffs last year. I mentioned for the fourth time he's having kind of a down year this year. I could see him just selling low, maybe. Would they demand a first-round pick? He's not worth a first-round pick. So then it gets into an argument of like, all right, can we give him a young player that is middling, that could fit kind of what they're doing? Taylor Hendricks would be interesting, right? I think Hendricks is going to come up a lot in these discussions because Hendricks is going to be a lot of eye of the beholder for a lot of teams. Like teams can think like there's some untapped potential there that we can fix him. He's also just not played because he's bad. He's not. I think it's alarming that he's not playing over Filipowski. I've said that I understand why Kevin Love is playing. And I understand why Kyle Anderson is playing, because Will Hardy needs like the plays to be executed competently. But the thing I've been really alarmed about is that Hendricks can't play over Kyle Filipowski, who has also not been good. And Hendricks fits in more lineups for what he can do. And Filipowski's good. He can score a bucket here and there, but he's not providing the playmaking or the shooting that you want. And he's certainly useless defensively. And so a team who needs some sort of defensive identity, I'm shocked Hendricks isn't out there. Anyways, what could you get a second-round pick in Taylor Hendricks for Lou Dort? I don't think that's enough. I don't think Oklahoma City would take that. And is that worth a first-round pick in Taylor Hendricks? I tend to want to just put my chips in somewhere else. But that is the quality type of player fitting an archetype that the Jazz don't have, and he's quality enough that if he's playing over our young players next year, of course we don't have a problem with him playing over a backcourt option that can't defend. Like if he's playing over Isaiah Collier in certain moments, or playing over second-year Walt Clayton, who's I think I've been a lot higher on Clayton recently. But in certain lineups, like if he's playing 30 minutes a night and Clayton's on the bench and Dort is drawing a defensive assignment, I just don't feel bad about that next year if the team is trying to win. So I really like Lou Dort as an option. He also mentions A.J. Mitchell. A.J. Mitchell is early in his career. He's still got like his rookie option still to pick up by the Thunder, and they have a rotation level backup point guard for $3 million. I don't think you're getting anything out of that. And he's getting better. More interesting conversation, though, is Cason Wallace, who had his fourth-year option obviously picked up for $7.5 million, and he's having a miserable offensive season. Defensively still looks pretty good, but he's having a miserable offensive season. So it would, because of his age, trajectory, and his salary, he would cost a couple first-round picks for Utah. And that wasn't mentioned by Breeze in his comment. He mentioned A.J. Mitchell specifically. But I think Cason Wallace, given his offensive struggles this year, that he was fabulous in the playoffs last year in many moments. He could be a player who is gettable if the Thunder are trying to tweak their roster to get better. Now, keep in mind, the Thunder are $1 million under the tax this year, and they're not going to pay the tax. If any team who's not in the tax is not going to get into the tax this year at the trade deadline. It's not what you do at the trade deadline. You use the trade deadline to get out of the tax. You don't use the trade deadline to get into the tax. So Cason Wallace, I think, is an interesting point there. The general assumption that Breeze has mentioned is like OKC can't pay everyone. I think that's true, but they're fine with their salaries this year and they're fine with their salaries next year because they have some flexibility. It's when Shea's extension kicks in 2 years from now, and I'm not sure the trade deadline this year is when they're going to start making moves to address that, if they want to address it at all. This summer is when I think the Thunder might think about it, especially dependent on if they win a title this year. Or just their general performance. A.K. Hugentobler mentions on Blue Sky, he mentions Anthony Davis. I think that's a fun one to just talk about real quick because he says in his afterwards that Danny Ainge did covet him in Boston and is now a distressed asset. Have him heal up the rest of this year, then give him a less than max 3-year extension. So clearly, everything that we've heard about Anthony Davis is that the dude wants to get paid. I don't think Utah is ever going to give that guy the money that he wants. But I see a scenario where not a single team in the NBA would want to give him the money he wants. And given his injury history and his far more limited versatility than what it was 4 or 5 years ago, is that a $35-40 million a year player? I think Kevin Durant's extension was very reasonable. I think Kevin Durant just extended for $40 million or $43 million or something like that. Off of hit, I think he's making in the high 50s right now. Durant is. The reason I mentioned Durant is I think like as Durant ages into his late 30s and where Davis is, who's a lot younger but obviously he's a great injury risk, is that gettable for $35 million a year? $40 million a year? If that's the price Anthony Davis is looking at, man, and he's like, he's not a center, doesn't want to play next to a center. All right, so you roll me out a lineup of Keontae, Ace, Lowry, Markkanen at the 3. So you got 3 shooters, Anthony Davis and Walker Kessler. Now, playing Davis alongside any other non-shooter tends to be a problem because Davis can't shoot threes anymore. Maybe he'll kind of flirt out there and shoot a random threes. I think he's at 28% from 3 this year. That is something I want to look up right now. Anthony Davis basketball reference. He's shooting 27% from 3 this year on 2 attempts a game. He has not shot over 20. He's not shot over 30% from 3 since 2019. He's been under 30% for the past 7 years from 3. So he's not a shooter. We have to stop thinking of him as like this stretch 4 type of person. But you would be saying, I'm going to add more of a FU defensive identity to Utah. The other alternative to this is if Utah's thinking about moving on from Walker Kessler and you're banking on Markkanen and Davis and getting another 3 in there to contend. And I think that is a riskier proposition to win a title than if you just kept Walker Kessler. And I think Ainge coveted him back in, 10 years ago when he was playing for the Pelicans, right? It was almost 10 years ago that these Danny Ainge trade ideas were coming up, right? Danny Ainge is in Boston, and Anthony Davis is having just monster seasons, right? 28 points a game, 12 rebounds, 2.5 blocks, 80% from the free throw line, shooting 69% nice from the free throw line this year. He's only played 9 games this year, but he's averaging 4.5 assists. He wasn't doing that in New Orleans. So there's a world where like the real Anthony Davis is still a really useful player, and I just have a lot of confidence in Utah as an organization to kind of work around that. who he is as a player. So, is the Danny Ainge interest still there? I wonder. I think that's an interesting point from him. What's another fun one to bring up here? We talked about RJ Barrett last week. That was my favorite trade target. Zion Williamson. That'll be our last one. Our friend Downright Dave asks about Zion Williamson. So let's think about the assumptions here, right? So first of all, note that Zion has $1 billion non-guarantee and guarantee conditions on his contract going out. Like if he meets certain weight requirements, if he meets certain games played, he gets it's a scale. It's an upscaling percentage of his guarantees will go higher if he plays a certain percentage of games. He has a couple weight check-ins too. But the weight check-ins seem to be behind him. He looks much trimmer these days. There's only so many New Orleans. I don't know if there's a limit on how much New Orleans food I could eat. It's my favorite city in the world, and I will eat everything there. Not a great place for Zion to be. But I said it in I forget which when I've said it before, but I've definitely said on this medium before that I just don't trust anything New Orleans has done, and I think New Orleans, they just have like a stink around. Like they make every player worse, and I think it's time to get Zion out of there and put him in an actual situation that is conducive to basketball development. So I'm already assuming that Zion is. There's a few assumptions here, right? My assumption is that Zion is way, way, way better than what he's showing in New Orleans. New Orleans is a miserable basketball team right now. He's just going through the motions, making sure that he gets paid, playing as many games as he can. He's still getting injured all the time. You also wonder about New Orleans medical staff being the cheapest in the league. Like, who's taking care of this guy? The other assumptions are New Orleans has come out and said that basically none of their players are on the trade block. Herb Jones isn't on the trade block. Trey Murphy's not on the trade block. And that they're not trading these players. Zion was included in that statement. It wasn't too long ago, though, that people were wondering if they should just waive Zion Williamson. Just get off of this mess. He doesn't play. He's constantly injured. Oh, he comes back for 2 games and he's injured again. So what would it really take to get Troy Weaver and Joe Dumars to go back on their word that, we're not trading these guys? So you have to put yourself in New Orleans shoes. Like, if a team offered you 2 medium firsts for Zion Williamson, would you take it? I think you have to. They're also close to the luxury tax. Like, this should not be a team that is remotely flirting with a luxury tax. Would 2 first-round picks get it done? Would 1 first get it done if you attach Cody Williams and Taylor Hendricks to it as well? So we'll give you some youth to play with as well. Zion is a lovely fit on this team. I just mentioned that the spacing fits with Anthony Davis and Walker Kessler would be an issue. It would be an even greater issue with Zion and Walker Kessler. But I'm already envisioning the inside-out game with Markkanen and Zion Williamson as being just a fabulous offensive fit. Keontae George as well. And unlike Davis and Kessler, I think Zion and Kessler would operate just different spheres of influence on the court. For some reason, like that even though the shooting is what it is, for some reason that just feels like it would work better, right? And both Zion and Kessler Kessler's three-point shooting is apparently budding. Something to look at. Zion Williamson has completely excised it from his game. I don't think he's even made a three this year. I'm going to go back on that as soon as I look this up, huh? Yeah, it says he's 0% from three this year. So I don't think he's made a three this year. But the dude's only 25. He manages minutes. Get him in a better basketball environment. I don't know. I think this is a guy I would. That's a guy I would give a. I'd give a first and a couple of our young players for. A first and Bryce Sensabaugh. Would that get it done if you're New Orleans? I think New Orleans should be incentivized to try to get off of Zion, and it's possible that we never get that version of Zion ever again, like the peak version of Zion Williamson. It could just be completely gone. That player doesn't exist. I would be willing to put a heavy amount of chips on the concept that New Orleans just doesn't know what the hell they're doing for player management, right? I don't trust them to have treated Zion Williamson appropriately. They're a clown of an organization. So I am trying to take a bet on who we think Zion Williamson would be. Does that fit the... And because I think the price would be low enough, right? So if New Orleans isn't going to do that for like less than 3 or 4 first-round picks, forget about it. That hurts the Jazz future too much. That's not worth it. The reason I'm excited about it is because I think if that is gettable, there's so many teams in the NBA who would be tantalized by that price, but they have other things going on that they want to grow their team around. That's not worth it to them. And Zion is good enough that you don't want to acquire him unless you think you're close to something. And when I mentioned way earlier that I feel like Utah is way closer to competence than New Orleans, for one, Sacramento, Dallas even. I think Dallas has Cooper Flag, but I think they have a lot of holes if they don't get Lively and Davis and Kyrie back healthy. They don't even own their picks. They're kind of in a tough situation with their injuries. Even Atlanta, I feel like Atlanta has the Pelicans pick this year, so perhaps Atlanta is probably the only team that I'm thinking next year they're ahead of Utah on hitting the gas pedal. Indiana gets Halliburton back, but I think this season showed that they got a lot more issues than just not having Tyrese Halliburton. Charlotte's going to finish ahead of Utah in the standings. I think Utah is way more well-equipped than Charlotte. So I don't think, and any of these actual contending teams right now, Denver, Minnesota, Houston, Boston, the teams who are really good want nothing to do with Zion Williamson. So if all the really bad teams should be not in the market for Zion Williamson, and all the really good teams shouldn't be in the market for Zion Williamson, it leaves all these middle teams next year. Who has the cap space and the asset trove where taking a chance on Zion Williamson and having completely fly in your face be worth it? I forgot how I started that sentence, so I don't know if "be worth it" was how I should have ended that because I forgot how I started the sentence as I was saying it. But I don't think that there are many teams, even in the middle, who giving a couple firsts or a couple good assets for Zion Williamson makes sense for them, especially from a salary standpoint. And so I'm sitting here looking at it at all of these teams in the NBA and constantly thinking Utah is the only team who projects to be a 40-ish win team next year because they're going to put the gas in. I'm telling you right now, they're a 38 to 42 win team next year. Trust me. Who Zion could immediately propel them to amazing success. But if he doesn't, and it's a horrible idea and a horrible trade, they should have never done it. they could lose assets that wouldn't really cripple them, or they'd feel real bad about it. They could take the hit. And so that's that sort of sexy idea that I'm in favor of. All right, let's do some more trade ideas next week. Look at that. I got an hour. You get me talking about the Jazz, you get me talking about trades, and I can't stop. Well, my friends, you have a fabulous weekend. We'll catch the Heat game tomorrow. Catch you next week. My name is Mark Russell Pereira. This has been a Salt City Hoops production. See you soon.